Hello. Have you ever been driving in your car and seen a nuclear power plant off in the distance and been worried about all that smoke coming out of the smokestacks? Or if you live in this area and driven by the Sharon Harris nuclear power plant in Raleigh and been concerned about what goes on behind all that barbed wire? I believe it's very important for us to know what's going on with nuclear power because we do have a nuclear reactor in our backyard. Now, I'd like to say I became interested in this topic because I believe it's my civic duty to understand where my electricity comes from. But in actuality, it's because I watched a documentary and it really piqued my interest. Also, there's been 40 years of hot debate, and recent disasters like the one in Japan have put it back into the news. Because of that, my goal is to inform you of some of the basic facts and realities concerning nuclear power in the US, how many plants we have, their basic safety records, and what do we do with the nuclear waste. So what I learned was this. Nuclear power comprises around 19% of the total energy production in this country. Now locally we have the Sharon Harris plant, and within 50 miles of its location there are 2.5 million people. So if you live in this area and you receive a power bill from Duke or Progress Energy, you're getting at least some of your electricity from nuclear. So what is a nuclear power plant exactly? Nuclear power plants produce electricity by boiling water into steam. This steam then turns turbines, which creates the electricity. Now, according to the Nuclear Energy Institute, these power plants obtain the heat needed to produce steam through a physical process. This process is called fission. The fuel used in this process is a small ceramic pellet packaged into long tubes in the reactor. These tubes are then separated by rods to control the nuclear reaction, and then water separates those. The immense heat created by the nuclear reaction, the splitting of the uranium atoms, creates steam. The steam is sent out to the turbine where it spins and creates our electricity. That steam is then vented out into the atmosphere through cooling towers. So there's not smokestacks, they're cooling towers, and that's not smoke, that's steam that we're seeing. Now that we understand the basics, or the bare basics, of how a nuclear power plant works, how many nuclear power plants we have in this country? Now, as you can see from this map, we have quite a few. As you can see, most of them are on the eastern half of the country, up along the eastern seaboard, where most of our major population centers are: Washington, D.C., New York City, Chicago, Detroit. Now, there are no operating reactors in Alaska or Hawaii, and that's why those states are not represented in this graphic. Now, the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission states on their website that they oversee 100 operational commercial reactors in this country and 36 test reactors. Now, test reactors are located mostly in universities for testing, research, and training. That includes the one at NC State in Raleigh, where students can enroll and become federally licensed Polestar nuclear reactor operators. Overall safety of all these reactors in the U.S. has actually been exceptional. According to the World Nuclear Association, there have been only 3 major reactor accidents in the history of civil nuclear power. 3 Mile Island in New York, Chernobyl in Soviet Russia, and Fukushima in Japan. The one in the US was contained without any harm to anybody. The second one in Russia involved an intense fire and had no provision for its control. And the third severely tested its containment, and some radioactivity was released into the atmosphere. But a 2009 study concluded that 1.84 million deaths have been prevented by civil nuclear power worldwide, or around 370 times the deaths attributed to nuclear power. Now in the US, that translates to around 1,500 deaths since the early 70s. It should be noted, however, that many of these deaths, or a high percentage of them, are occupational hazards like slip and falls, and they have nothing to do with the radioactivity whatsoever. Which leads us to the radioactive nuclear waste. So what is nuclear waste exactly? Well, simply put, nuclear waste is what comes out of the reactor after it's all been used up. The waste, sometimes called spent fuel, is dangerously radioactive, and it remains that way for thousands of years. It's so toxic that if you stood within just a couple yards of it, Within seconds, you receive such a high dose of radiation that you would die of acute radiation poisoning within a couple days. Now, in practical terms and in reality, this nuclear fuel and the spent fuel is never left unshielded. It's kept underwater for several years because water is an incredibly effective shield for radiation. Once the radiation levels decay to a certain level, they're moved into concrete casks, and those are moved off-site. Now, what we do with these concrete casks for the long term is still a matter of hot debate, but the amount of nuclear waste we produce in this country is roughly around 39.5 grams, which is about the weight of 7 US quarters. So as you can see, it's not very much. Hopefully, this basic overview has increased your knowledge a little bit, so when you're driving past one of those nuclear power plants and one of your friends freaks out about all that smoke, you can tell them to relax. It's only steam. Thank you very much.